Redrop that link one more time, though.
Yeah. Yeah, so hi, everyone. Welcome to the annual Kansas School Social Work Association Spring Conference. We are so happy for all of you guys to join us today. We have two fantastic speakers in mental health joining us, Jason and Jim. My name is Nicole Gilmore, and I am the Southeast Regional Rep for Casewell, and one of the members who helped organize and put on this conference today. So if you're not already a part of Casewell, we would love for you to join us to become a member to stay in the loop on different CEU events, resources, and networking with other school social workers. You can register on our website, casewell.org, for only $40 per year, and students are free. By being a part of our CEU training today, you will get 6 CEUs, 3 in DSM and 3 in ethics. And these will be emailed out within the week or the next couple of weeks after completing today. Going over the agenda real quick, our first speaker, Jason, will speak today on the DSM portion from 9 to 12. Then we will have our second speaker, Jim, with ethics from 1 to 4. In between that, we will announce the School Social Worker of the Year and Champion for Children Awards, as well as do a quick board meeting. So stay tuned for all of that. To also receive your CEUs, you will need to do an evaluation. That will be sent through an email. And for us to record who is here today, we're just going to have you guys type your name in the chat at the beginning and at the end of each session. So to get started, go ahead and type your name in the chat so we know you are here. Awesome. To help minimize extra chatter, I also want to reiterate the importance of making sure you're muted so that we can hear our awesome speakers today. There may be opportunities for breakout sessions, and in that, we definitely welcome you to unmute yourself and discuss away, but we just want to make sure that everyone can hear and that it isn't going to become a disruption having background noise. If there's any technical issues, also feel free to type in the chat. But without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome our first guest speaker, Jason, to kick off the event. Jason is the Clinical Adolescent Director for the Anxiety Center with Renew Counseling in Olathe. He has more than 30 years of experience working with and for children, youth, and families, catalyzing change at the individual, family, organizational, and systems levels. With a master's in clinical psychology, he has provided crisis management, intensive in-home therapy, and wraparound services for children with emotional and behavioral challenges. He has 20 plus years working with and volunteering with youth and young adults through youth ministry and community programming. In partnership with North Kansas City Hospital, he also created or co-created the Quirky app to connect Kansas City 14 to 24-year-olds to articles, events, and resources focused on mental health and well-being. Currently, he has developed and is directing the 2 Tense Intensive Outpatient Program for adolescents struggling with anxiety and depression, and he is working on building strong partnerships with Kansas City area schools to speak on topics such as anxiety, grit, and parenting. Today with us, he will be discussing adolescent clinical engagement, the art of diffusion, assessment, diagnosis, and intervention of anxiety and depression. So Jason, go ahead, it's all yours.
Well, thank you very much. And I just want to start with just how much I appreciate you guys are on the front lines. I deal with tough stuff every day, but you guys are having to figure out whether this kid is truly depressed or suicidal that day, or if they're just trying to get out of a test or something else. And I at least get them coming in knowing that they're going to have to work on something and that their family is engaged in it. And so just a big thank you to the work you guys do all over the state, wherever you are. Both my parents were teachers, so I kind of have an idea of school systems and stuff, and I'm in there a lot and have 4 of my own children. So with that said, I am diagnosis and looking at the DSM is not always the funnest thing. So we are going to do this in kind of a couple of different ways. And so just bear with me through the first half while we go through some DSM stuff. And then I'm going to try and give you the way, what I think is a more effective way of diagnosis and understanding what's going on in a young person. What I think is a more effective way of diagnosis. And then a lot of a lot of practical tools that we use in our program, and structured and such. And why it's such a huge packet is like I've tried to give it to you where you could pull out a page or 2 pages of that packet and use them, maybe not as a whole as a program, but when you've got a young person. So that's the overview of what we're doing. Oh, good, that's going to work. She did say I do direct an adolescent program, an intensive outpatient. We are 4 days a week, 3 hours a day, 5 weeks to get all the lessons in. We deal with school avoidance, suicidal ideation, panic, social anxiety, general anxiety, depression, a whole list. We serve the whole Kansas City metro and regularly have people driving in from Lawrence and other places. So that is what we do. And in that, I want to share, just to start off with, a couple of, and these, again, my examples are going to be for the most part coming from young people who are part of my program. And so they're going to, I don't know, I think this is pervasive in the schools and from what I know of them, but I just want to share, we have them write about their struggles at least once during the program. And so just a couple of how young people have described what's going on if they're struggling with anxiety or depression or the mix of the two. So this young person, I tried to color, but everything was so gray. I tried to breathe, but my thoughts were suffocating. I tried to count to 3, but I was already in too deep. I need to do something. Fix this. Help me. No more coping. There's a ghost fighting within me, trying to take over this body. If we are being honest, it won a long time ago, but my body is still here. I smiled as I held back the tears. So many questions leading to more and more therapy sessions. I'm so tired. I've gone numb, slowly fading and losing feeling. Please help me. And another young person, and again, if I remember correctly, that poem was from a 17-year-old. This is from a 13, or they were 13 at the time. A beam of light, miles and miles away, with laughter and squeals, dancing in friendship, a hope, a smile, a happy ending. Something she would never get as the beam of light showing through the tunnel got smaller and smaller. It seemed as if a cap or a lid was being placed on the sunshine, while her monsters dragged her further away from hope. A pit of black tears, cuts and blood, sadness and misunderstanding. This was her tunnel, and she was the only one in it, the only one left. Just smile, they said. You have no reason to be sad, they always whispered under their breath. And she always wished she could be the one saying that, not the one in the pit. But she knew her monsters would never allow that. You can even see how they understand it's hope that's fading inside of them. And so finally, just to set us up, this young person, tired of people disappointing me, tired of being let down time after time, tired of feeling on edge, waiting for something I'll never know. Tired of being told things will get better, because what if they never do? What if I'm just screwed up? Tired of the what ifs. Tired of feeling like a failure. Tired of messing up time after time. So don't tell me to just get through today, you liar. You shameless, stupidly hopeful liar. So yes, I'm tired. For God's sake, let me be. That is, as we walk through this, what I'm hoping to give you some tools and some ways of thinking about to help with. Because I really believe that every time I ask, and I ask this, I don't know, every couple months for sure, in a room of 12 young people, all of them diagnosed with something, all of them in intensive treatment, and I'm like, how many of your friends or classmates would you say are struggling with some of the same things? And literally, they're all like everybody. Everybody I know is struggling. They just haven't found the help right now. So to set that up, I'd love you to just feed in the oops, that was not supposed to happen. In the chat, to just thoughts on how do you think you are being effective with an adolescent? And if you can singularly unmute yourself and talk, I want to spend a little bit of energy here because I see so many young people and families coming in saying they're counselors. I ask this picture of counselors all the time, but how are they being effective? All right. Carrie says their own self-report. They keep wanting to come back to me because they see the benefit. Yes. See progress. They are engaged in sharing.
This is a perfect segue because we have talk about
when they are able to genuinely regurgitate things we have discussed in group, and it's like a light bulb is clicked. I love that moment. Love that moment. Feedback from the students.
Good job.
Teachers, parents, guardians. They offer stories, information
It's a little
without.
hot in here. So I'm going to apologize. I
See
have
the
in my
picture?
ear because today is the Kansas School Social Work Association conference. So right now I'm actually learning about how do we know
You're
we're
not
being effective
muted.
with an adolescent. So
Hey,
it's about
Susan, we
adolescent
can all
depression and
hear
anxiety.
you.
So I just want to half hear it because I'll have to
Susan
go
Susan
back to
DeVoe,
it.
we can all hear you.
I am Susan DeVoe. I'm the rap worker.
Susan,
And Mrs. Van Reen said, can you
we can hear
Jason, can
you.
you add like Kristen or Nicole as a co-host so that they can mute everyone? And then Susan, we can hear everything you're saying.
Jason, if you just click on mine or Nicole's name, you should be able to add co-host.
Oh, okay. I'm like, I have no idea. Our company Renew uses Google products, and so I'm fairly familiar with Google Meets. So Zoom is a little bit. Who am I looking for?
Either me or Nicole. It doesn't matter.
It also appears as though somebody named Donna Holmes is unmuted.
Okay, Kristen, I think I just tried to give it to you. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
All right. All right. Thank you. Feedback from students and teachers and others. They feel safe. I think that's a good one. This year's been so tough. So lots of grace, modeling, and acceptance. Student continues to come back. When a student says, remember when you said, when they're using the tools you're teaching, I love these answers in that you're looking for feedback from the young person, and that's how you're telling you're being effective. And so with that, let's move forward. You guys have this in your packet also in case you want the whole thing at some times, but I want to set up a couple of case studies that we're going to revisit on a couple of times throughout the program. So this is Matt, and sometimes this is the kind of information we get. Sometimes we don't even get all this information. So many parents have a romantic story about how they met. Matt's parents didn't. His father was working in a psychiatric hospital and his mother was a 16-year-old patient. They conceived Matt 3 months after meeting. His mother's family was wealthy and influential in the government, and when they learned about the pregnancy, they gave his father a choice. He could marry Matt's mom or he could go to jail. He chose marriage. A year later, Matt's mother left and his father got stuck with the boy. He hated his situation and even hated Matt a little because Matt reminded him of the disastrous marriage. Matt's father felt that he had only made one small mistake, but now would have this burden, Matt, for the next 18 years. Matt's father soon remarried, this time to a woman with 2 children of her own, and together they had a 3rd child. Matt's stepmom was preoccupied with her own children and treated Matt indifferently. The best year of Matt's childhood was 2nd grade when his family lived on the farm. Matt's parents were so busy with farm work that they had little time for Matt, which suited him just fine. He became immersed in his physical surroundings. He ate green apples straight from the tree, explored deep into the woods, and watched water bugs skim across the stream. It was one of the few times in his childhood when he lived outside his own head. After a year, the farm business failed, and Matt's family was forced to move to the city. Money was tight, and his parents fought all the time. His father was aggressive and moody and often yelled at the kids, especially Matt, whom he regularly intimidated, belittled, and sometimes hit. Now Matt is 15. He is failing several classes. He sits by himself at lunch hour. His father has spent years berating him, shouting things like, "What's wrong with you? Why can't you do anything right? Give me an answer. Say something. Don't just sit there looking stupid." Matt flees into his imagination. He gets his catcher's mitt and baseball and goes into the backyard where he throws the ball against the side of the garage again and again, pretending to pitch in front of a cheering crowd at the Cleveland Stadium. His fantasies are always the same. He starts as the underdog, too young and small to succeed as a pitcher. He's facing a great team like the New York Yankees. After about an hour of pitching against the garage, he imagines that the Yankees are on the verge of winning and that the bases are loaded. Then he stretches his arm way back and throws. The last batter strikes out and the crowd goes wild, cheering, "Matt, Matt, Matt, Matt," as he walks off the field. He's led the Cleveland Indians to the championship and is the most loved person in Cleveland. The next day at school, he is teased for his shoes because they're old and dirty. The kids say, "Hey, you need to soak those in Clorox. Your name's Clorox from now on." He plays cool and laughs around with the joke. Soon everybody at school is calling him Clorox. When the final bell rings, he runs the whole mile home. Obviously, that's an example, but I would say I have heard scenarios. Probably you guys have heard scenarios that are just as challenging as that. To give you the whole thing, I'm going to switch over into the packet so we can be looking at that story, and at the same time, I'm going to see how this works. Yes. Kristen, give me a thumbs up if that just switched over to the packet. Thank you. Want to make sure. So you have, again, a little bit of more information on my program. I do want to start. If you have not found Erica's Lighthouse, I just found it recently, but it's literally built for schools. So built for you guys, and, you know, which, as you know, comes with a perspective of understanding education and stuff. But just really quick, running through this list to start us off. This is, I'm going to go through your DSM-4, DSM-5 TR, but this is probably the best list you're going to see on depression versus suicide, and then suicide and how far they overlap. Feelings of sadness, tearfulness, emptiness, or hopelessness, anger outbursts, irritability. We're even going to look at some of how criteria that applies to teenagers is not the same as adults, and yet we're still diagnosing them with adult criteria. Sleep disturbances, tiredness and lack of energy, reduced appetite, anxiety, agitation, restlessness, slow thinking, feelings of worthlessness and guilt, fixating on the past. Something you might do literally while you're watching this is just check or write a note to yourself as which one of these apply to Matt. You know, as you just as you listen to this: poor performance or poor attendance at school, using recreational drugs or alcohol, self-harm and unnecessary risk-taking, avoidance of social interaction, frequent or recurrent thoughts of death, suicide, or suicidal attempts, and then straight suicide, giving away belongings, saying goodbye to people as if they will not be seen again, talking about suicide or death, even in a joking way. So just going to put that right in front of you. I thought this was an excellent list, and also want to give you guys the tool that Erica's Lighthouse, and there's a link later on in the packet to it, but that is I was impressed in the little bit I spent on that. So here's Matt's story. What shows up with you from you when you're working or interacting with a young person like Matt? And, you know, throw it in chat. Think about it. Consider your feelings, thoughts, doubts, and hopes. Like to give you guys some space to think about, and you can answer any of those questions. Just throw them in. I'd like to read. But what shows up for you? Do you think it's possible to help Matt when he's surrounded by so many unhelpful people? How would you conceptualize Matt's problem? If you were his counselor, how would you ideally like to act towards him? Think about your own values. How might you seek to help Matt? They don't receive compliments, encouragement well, not at first. That is very true. it's interesting that a lot of people somehow think that coming with compliments is a way to ingratiate yourself with young people. It's usually not. They usually think it's fake. And so you can't always jump into that. He's a lack of social support and could use some support in gaining some. Yeah. Listening instead of trying to fix. Grace, he needs to build connections. Yeah. Excellent. I'm gonna share one more. I want you to think they're a little bit different. Yeah, a wonderful opportunity to help Matt. You guys are already, you're gonna be so, I don't know. This may not even be new material for some of you. Some of you are just giving really good answers and where I'm hoping you land even at the end of the day. So these are good answers. So that's Matt's story. I want us to think about that. I'm going to flip up to, Bree's story. And this, I do get some of Matt's story. I get a ton of Bree's story in my program. Don't leave your bag in the hall, Bree's mom yells. Then as Bree walks past her mom without saying a word, her mom says, "Don't you ignore me." Bree rushes into her room and slams the door. "Why are you so negative all the time?" her mom yells through the door. "This is the best time of your life. Just wait until you grow up. It's not going to get any easier." I can't stand it anymore, Bree thinks. Nobody gets me. Nobody likes me. Bree sits on her bed with her precious possessions surrounding her, her journal on her desk, her art posters, and her yellow laptop and cell phone. Other things are hidden behind the secret door cut into the ceiling of her closet. A little bottle of wine, some pot, and her cutting implements. Bree thinks about how stupid her parents are for not knowing that she steals their wine. Then she thinks over her day. I've been going to the same stupid school for 4 years, and today was the worst day ever. It was so boring I felt like cutting myself just to block out the boredom. My friends talked about the usual stuff, boys and moronic boy bands. My teachers talked in boring voices about boring stuff. Mr. Woods made us copy paragraph of paragraph from his PowerPoint slides. Miss Campbell showed a 50-minute video that was at least 30 years old. Mr. Wilson told me to grow up because I was drawing instead of paying attention to a stupid class. I can't stand it anymore. None of them understand me. None of them care about what I want, what I feel, and what I think. Then Bree picks up her notebook and starts writing. My pain is alive. My soul aches. Nothing helps. I have nowhere to go. I've tried everything to control my feelings, but nothing works. If I lose control, I might actually go too far. That scares me and makes my heart hurt too. So I'm going to keep cutting deeper and deeper. I can't stand it. I don't intend to kill myself. At least I don't think I do. Bree throws her journal across the room. Then almost automatically, she extracts the blade from her secret place, sits down on her bed, and slowly cuts her upper thigh. The cutting feels otherworldly, like someone else is doing it. She watches as the blood runs down her leg. She had felt like screaming at her mom just a few seconds ago, but now she feels nothing. Gotten some other comments in here, so I'm going to read those, but the same questions. What shows up for you? And I think we need to think about this because we spend energy with these young people. Active listening is important. Rachel shared. Validate, start working towards resiliency. Encourage him to feel his feelings. Just a little bit on Matt. Give him space. Helping Bree find her strengths. Yeah, we're going to talk about that later. But thank you, Rebecca. I agree. Strengths, passions, things that matter to her. Anyone else any thoughts on how you might help Bree, yeah, especially differently? Sounds like Bree is looking for a moment of relief and focus. I agree. Well, try and keep Matt and Bree in your mind as we step forward, helping Bree and mom find a way to communicate, for Bree to feel understood by mom, teaching appropriate self-regulation skills. Yeah, if you guys have the opportunity, I actually tell the kids, so the least favorite part of my program for young people is we have this family day. So once a week, parents come in from 3:30 to 5, so an hour and a half, and we essentially force some meaningful conversations between them. And the kids will start off saying that's the worst. They're anxious about it. They don't want to do that. They're uncomfortable with it. And I'm pretty straight up with them. I'm like, your parents need help just as much as, or need tools and other things just as much as you do. So if you guys have the opportunity to help parents and kids communicate, it is huge. Diana shared a lot of people write off this as attention seeking. We all crave connection. Connection, attention is a human need, and we've got to help staff see this as an opportunity to engage, not ignore. And thanks, Diana, for pointing out that a lot of this is helping the people that are with them the most, the teachers, figure out how to see and recognize things. Collaborative safety planning, I think that's important. Darren agreed with Diana. So we're going to go through. I don't really want, hopefully you guys can drop down the packets on your computers at this point. But I want us to think about, and this is kind of the traditional DSM-5 TR. And so this is the latest version. It was released in March. Work on her with some harm reduction techniques. Hopefully that means you're already in conversation and know she's actually harming herself. I think this one still is pretty hidden as far as that goes. So the DSM-5 TR came out in March of this year. And so I'm going to walk you through, some of it. And I have worked really hard to get my formatting to look just like it. So if you go and get yourself a DSM-5 TR or whatever, you should be able to see, and the page numbers that this references should lead you to that page number if you somehow need more. And I didn't take everything from there. The DSM includes lots of things like prevalence and comorbidity and other things. You can decide if that's important to you, or you can ask questions and I'll try to respond where I think so. When you're thinking about the DSM, why it's important in our world, for sure. I don't know if you guys have to do any billing, but I have to use codes when I do diagnosis and bill to insurance for this young work. But separation anxiety disorder, this is a huge one. Anybody, if any of these, you could just throw like A4. If any of these jump out as hitting Matt or Bree, just type Matt, and then this one jumps out at you, or Bree. So developmentally inappropriate and excessive fear or anxiety concerning separation from those to whom the individual is attached, with at least 3 of the following: reoccurring excessive distress, persistent and excessive worry, persistent and excessive worry about experiencing an untoward event, persistence, reluctance or refusal to go to school, fear or reluctance about being alone, fear or refusal to sleep away, repeated nightmares involving the theme of separation, repeated complaints of physical symptoms. I would guess your guys' nurse see just as many disorders as anybody else does. And that's hard to be aware of all the time. So separation anxiety, they feel anxious or avoidance is persistence, lasts at least 4 weeks in children and adolescents. Disturbance causes clinically significant distress. The disturbance is not better explained by another mental disorder. Kind of the basic structure of a DSM diagnosis criteria. So my wife and I adopted a couple of young kids. One is now six and a half, and the other's 4.5. The 6-year-old has not fully attached. We're still working on it, got them later. They've had significant trauma. The 4-year-old has attached, and it's really interesting to watch some of these things because they clearly have separation anxiety. And so screaming as they have to walk into the classroom or preschool or whatever they're doing, they come into our room every single night. We have seen the night terrors like diminish, so that's not as drastic, but every time they would night terror. So, when you hear about a young person talking about, I wake up every night. Well, what do you wake up doing? What do you wake up thinking? What do you wake up remembering? Because those are kind of things that'll clue you in that maybe they're, and this is going to come up frequently when they've lost somebody in their life at some point, even a grandparent dying, a friend dying. We're running to more and more young people who have had friends or at least closer connections commit suicide, family trait kind of things. And so a lot of those things can trigger some of the separation anxiety. Specific phobia, I really think if you're going to see this at school, especially, this one's pretty obvious. It's also one of the more easier things to treat because you can build an exposure as long as you can get the lower tiers of the exposure ladder to be stuff that they're willing to try, and you can work their way up. And so marked fear or anxiety about a specific object. The phobic object almost always provokes immediate fear or anxiety. That thing is actively avoided. We are at the beginning stages of, again, my raised him his whole life. My other 6-year-old has got emotion dysregulation. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but they go from highs to lows, and that's kind of a precursor to anxiety. We're also seeing some real specific fears to bees and areas that bees have been. And so, if I can keep it to just one item, I'm actually going to be okay with it, and we'll work on exposing him to bees in healthy ways. But you can see it just coming on in his life. And so, one ways to see this in school might be, is there somebody that gets taunted or picked on in the same way a lot? Like is everybody saying spider to a kid, or bringing a plastic spider and knowing they're going to get a reaction? All right. You might be thinking there's a phobia of their kind. All right. In this case, if you ever have to code it, you're supposed to code animal, natural environment, blood, situational, or other. Again, I don't know that I think either that this one or anxiety hit on Matt and Bree very much. I also promise this is probably the, I don't know. It's hard to go over this criteria in exciting and fun ways. So we're doing it early while we're all fresh, and we're going to revisit it in more creative ways as we move forward. Social anxiety disorder. This one, I am betting you see in the schools a lot, or you wonder about a lot, or this is where some of the truancy kind of issues come up because they're so socially anxious that they can't even get there. So marked fear or anxiety about one or more social situations, individual fears that he or she will act in a way or show anxiety symptoms that will be negatively evaluated. So I've got one in group right now, and I'm fearful it's going to go back, but this young person, the social anxiety is so huge that like they have to take breaks from just sitting in presence in group. And so group is truly a exposure dosage from them. But the second the parents start coming in, so yesterday was a really tough day. He immediately, and I think this is part of social anxiety, it's part of every adolescent that they think other people are focused on them and paying attention to them. But as soon as he gets the sense, or if there is actually an indication, somebody points near him or at him or makes a comment, this just goes off the charts, all right? Social situations are avoided, so he's going to disappear. There's clearly intense fear, anxiety. The fear, anxiety is out of proportion to the actual threat. The fear, anxiety. And so that's one, when it's out of proportion, when we're trying to use logic or rational thought or explain the safety of the situation, and it has zero impact whatsoever, that's when you're probably looking at pretty close to a disorder level. Like they can't even get themselves to recognize this is a safe situation. So in this young person, they can at least recognize it. They also have it mixed with some perseverating thinking, so the thought just keeps coming back, and we've got to figure out how to get them to be able to push it out of their head. Significantly distress or impairment in social situations. You can't say that the fear can be said to be a substance, drug, something else, or a medical condition. It's not explained better by symptoms of another disorder. And then there's other situations that might lead to social anxiety. All right. So you do specifier performance. If fear is restricted to speaking or public performing. Okay. So this is where a young person is actually getting by, but just having to get up in front of people is where it adds into place. So that's social anxiety. In between social and panic in the book is actually agoraphobia. I just can't imagine how you guys would even have to see agoraphobia. They wouldn't be coming to school. So you can go find that criteria. It's just not as pertinent. And really the stats say that's, older women who have lost somebody in their life. Panic disorder. Now this one is probably coming up more and often, and this is F41. The criteria: recurrent, unexpected panic attacks. Panic attack is an abrupt surge of intense fear or intense discover that reaches a peak within minutes, and during which time 4 or more of the following symptoms occur. Palpitations, pounding heart, sweating, trembling or shaking, sensations of shortness of breath, feelings of choking, chest pain, nausea, feeling dizzy, unsteady, lightheaded, or faint, numbness, tingling sensation, chills or heat sensations, derealization, feelings of unreality or depersonalization, being detached from oneself, fear of losing control or going crazy, fear of dying. Fear, at least one of the attacks has been followed by persistent concern or worry about additional panic attacks. The disturbance is not attributable to another substance of some kind, and it's not better explained by another mental disorder. All right, so those are panic disorders. Lots of times you'll see a young person who feels it coming on and tries to go to the bathroom, so they're not doing it in front of other people. This can turn into the whole social anxiety. So if this happened and they were embarrassed in school, then it makes it harder and harder for them to come into school until they have skills and tools to actually deal with the symptomology, much less whatever the underlying stuff might be in this case. And this is how DSM works. You have to have a specifier, but literally it's the same criteria. Panic attack per se is not a mental disorder and not coded. So just because somebody has a panic attack, it's a disorder. If you go look at this, if it's got some of these same things in panic disorder, and you have that they think about it a lot. And so that's just a real, I don't know. That's how DSM works. Generalized anxiety disorder, I would suspect you're seeing more and more of that in school. So this excessive anxiety and worry, dread, which is apprehensive expectation occurring more days than not for at least 6 months, interferes with school performance. The individual finds it difficult to control the worry. The anxiety and worry are associated with 3 or more of the following: restlessness or feeling keyed up, being easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating, muscle tension, sleep disturbance. Interestingly enough, it's comorbidity, but intermeshed morbidity really happens a lot in something like this. So panic attack, now I'm socially anxious. I'm having a hard time controlling it, so I choose to control it with TikTok or YouTube. And the moment I try to go to sleep, this is all in my head. I'm thinking about all of these situations. That's when I'm like, all right, I need to go do something else. So now I'm watching YouTube until 2 or 3 a.m., in which case I don't get enough sleep. I have less willpower. The next day is even harder. I feel more embarrassed. You can see this cycle playing itself out, and these symptoms just kind of racking up. Clinically significant distress, disturbance, again, not to another substance or another mental disorder. So this is a young person who, really can't say what it's about, because it probably has to do with, just having come up with an uncertainty about the world. I'm very concerned about the impact of COVID in the long term, just because at least beforehand you could expect, football season, basketball season, track, summer, you could expect theater productions, you could expect dances and proms, and at least there was some consistency and this actual belief that these opportunities would come up. Right now, like, what, I mean, honestly, like, prom could go away. Hasn't. Most of the kids around here have gotten to go to prom, but it could just go away. Everything can go away. If the world is so uncertain, why not just distract yourself and be in the moment, as the case may be? Okay, so that's your anxiety disorders. Somebody real quick, or a couple people, which ones of these do you think apply to Matt or Bree? Anybody, just any of them, any symptoms, just reflecting on Matt having a rough home life and now beating himself up internally, and Bree doing some cutting and some wine and just angry. Do I still have people with me? Yes, good. Thank you, Bree. I appreciate that. All right. I want to plow through this. I really do. There's really some neat. Both said it applies to both. Yes. And I would say in my world, and we're closing in on 400. I think we're at 390 young people who've been through our program in some way, shape, or form, that the examples I gave you probably had significant components of this anxiety to begin with, but the cycle has gone on too long that it's now moved into the depression realm, and these things get really get mixed up. I'm waiting to find the researcher who's doing some good work on what the mixture of anxiety and depression looks like in young people, because I'm at the point of thinking that anxiety turns into depression. Depression causes some generalized anxiety. ADHD, if not handled and structured well, turns into anxiety about the world or embarrassment, and then the cycle goes on and you end up at depression. So it's one of my problems with straight up and down diagnostic criteria with adolescents is, yes, I can diagnose these things, I can put them into categories. Is that the most helpful way to think about the young person, as far as putting interventions in place, helping them in the longer haul, and or is that really useful to give them the label? With that, I'm going to try and do depression just a little bit differently, along with the DSM criteria, is to try and give you a big picture. Because depression is not the same as in adults, across the boards, and it can appear differently in young people. So adjustment disorder with depressed mood, the four four major types of depression in adolescence, so adjustment disorder. And what this is going to mean is that the young person has had a legitimate event in their life that would impact any one of us. All right. Somebody died, somebody got divorced, parents got divorced. And so I don't know how to handle it. And I don't have tools to deal with it, but there's at least a clear cause. All right. Persistent depressive disorder or dysthymia, persistent, low grade, chronic that lasts for more than a year. Teens with dysthymia are often irritable and they may have low energy, low self-esteem, and feelings of hopelessness. So to give you an example, we've got a young person in group today. He's a senior, literally going off to a great college, has clearly been successful. But when you ask the right questions, this young person believes they're depressed. But it's not major depression where it is stopping their life and they're not doing things. It is more of this dysthymia, which is coming across as generalized irritability, even when it's not necessary, not really enjoying life. So they're kind of just forcing their way through things, and they have the academic prowess and just physical skills to do most everything. And so this is one that's really challenging. Sometimes they won't even get help and they'll wonder why they just don't have any of the pleasures that other kids do, and or they just start ignoring their feelings. And so it's just like, well, everything's blue, so why care about much of anything? 11% of teens are dealing with some level of this. Bipolar disorder, I kind of, that one's been well known, but a lot of people want to say bipolar disorder because the depression was so bad, and then they actually get to be excited and have energy because the depression is lessed up. The stroke, to make it bipolar, it actually has to go from a down place of depression to like truly a manic where they're staying up all nights, they're truly thinking they're bulletproof, they are out of control, silliness or whatever. But it has to have both sides of that. So the mania has to be included for it to be bipolar, not just that their mood changes on a frequent basis. Sorry. Major depression, it's the most serious. We'll go through the criteria. Estimated that 13% of teens experience at least one major episode in 2017. I actually will argue that's gone up. And so, and after puberty, girls are twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression. It just looks different. Am I seeing an increase in DMDD? I wish I worked with them, like I was interacting more with a larger population so I had a better normal curve. Like every kid not even telling, like by the time you get to my room and talking to me, you're struggling with 2 or 3 significant issues. And so I don't know that I'm seeing an increase. I'm reading, in the literature that, and especially news right now, within the last month, the New York Times has posted 3 or 4 different significant articles about mental health in adolescents and how they're struggling. The Atlantic Monthly just published a pretty solid article on those, on the same thing. So it's being recognized. So as an increase, and I would argue that a lot of that is adjustment disorder. Does not mean it can't change into other types. But after COVID, after life changed, I will say I have seen an increase in that category where somehow school was a intervention in itself between their parents being divorced. So the stability of school getting to do that ameliorated to some extent the bouncing between houses and inconsistency of values and parenting. But boy, COVID, and that kid had to be all the time at one house or all the time at the other house, and all the problems you heard from just, intact families multiplied and families got rougher. So I did see a significant increase, even in my program, of more challenging cases where their parents were divorced. I'm real happy it's balanced a little bit back out, and I'm getting two parent homes to mix in with the single parent or the depression or the divorced parents. So real quick, just again, to give you a bigger picture than just the DSM, and to show where there are some differences. Teenage depression, irritability. All right. Adults are going to usually say they're blue. They don't want to do anything. They're barely able to function. Teens are going to be increasingly irritable, and just for no reason. Maybe behave disrespectfully or less patience. The biggest criteria, and I'm sure I'm not telling you guys anything, any significant changes in their life, academic changes, if they used to be a A/B student and they're now struggling to keep C's, that's a sign of something, but it can be a sign of everything from drug use to a mental disorder kind of thing, to struggling with existential questions. And again, some teens might maintain a high grade point average. Again, so my young man with dysthymia, grade points not getting hurt at all by their struggling. Sensitivity to criticism, if that's gone up. And then social withdrawal. All right. So if they start withdrawing like they used to sit at a table with some people, even if they weren't all great friends, and now they're sitting by themselves, that's going to be an indication of some social withdrawal. Like they were in something play last year, and now they're not even willing to go out for it. Those kind of things. Sometimes it's hard to see social withdrawal because they're always around people. And I would, down here, so as teen might begin to hang out with the wrong crowd, whatever wrong means, but they're talking to people that aren't healthy for them. And that is a form of social withdrawal, because they're withdrawing from peers who are equal or challenging for them. And so I've got a young woman who we've worked with who apparently got like a 35 on her ACT, was in theater, is charismatic, like could be an amazing leader kind of thing. And the people she's hanging out with are, not caring about life or listening to anyone else in their life, aren't working on their schoolwork, are using drugs and alcohol as their major just coping with life mechanisms. And so in this case, this young person literally was socially withdrawing while still being surrounded by people. But these people were like, she could still have that thought of, I am, like, maybe I'm helping these people, or this is the crowd I feel worthy to be hanging in because I don't like myself so much. So I think social withdrawal can look differently in a couple different ways. All right, I'm going to keep trying to plow through here. Major depressive disorder, 5 or more of the following symptoms during the same 2-week period, and represent a change from previous functioning. And that, again, the change is probably the most important thing that you can be looking for. And you can't clearly say these are because of drugs or because of something else that's happened to them. Depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities. Significant weight loss with not dieting, or weight gain. It's super challenging with teens because literally every change criteria can go either direction. It can go down, it can go up, but the change is what's important. Insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day, psychomotor agitation, fatigue, feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, diminished ability to think or concentrate, indecisiveness. This is the young person who, literally their answer is, I don't know. You put 3 choices in front of them and they still are like, I don't know. That's a level of indecisiveness that's indicative of something. And it can't be used by, can't be based on other substances, and not better explained by schizoaffective. I'm hoping you guys aren't dealing with too much of that, but is not superimposed on schizophrenia. Any of the schizo disorders kind of take precedence if you think there is delusions or hallucinations going on. You shouldn't be as concerned about depression. You should be concerned about getting that young person to some kind of medical support to look at. If they're talking, and again, here, I'll bring up Matt. As soon as you learn how much time they're spending in their head and that fantasy is maybe a little bit bigger than a fantasy should be in a kid's head, they probably are going to need to have medication to be able to help that, because they've started decontextualizing the world around them. It's only major depression if there's never been a manic episode or a hypomanic episode, because otherwise then it gets called bipolar. I don't even care about coding, but you can code it mild, moderate, severe, psychotic features, partial remission, full remission, unspecified. Back in the day, that used to be an OS. Like, I don't know, and I can't blame this on anything. And you can specify with anxious distress, with mixed features, with melancholic, with atypical, mood congruent, psychotic features, mood incongruent, catatonia, those kind of things. So that's super quick flying through. Major depression, persistent depressive disorder is pretty much what it sounds like. Depressed mood for most of the day, for more days than not. Subjective account, observation by others. You guys can get free access to the I'm going to forget it. I'll have to look that up for you. But if you look up G9 or G7, you can get free access to the tools we use to diagnose anxiety and depression, because it will ask that set of questions. Presence while depressed, poor appetite, insomnia, low energy, low self-esteem. During a 2-year period, individual has never been without symptoms. Major depressive order may be continuously present. Again, you've got exactly the same specifiers with this and putting them together. So it's really major depression extended out longer. Your specifiers, they put them in there, but mixed features is going to mean elevated or expansive mood, inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, more talkative than usual, or pressure to keep talking, flight of ideas, increased energy or goal-directed activity, increased or excessive involvement in activities that risky behaviors is what that means. With melancholic features, loss of pleasure in all or almost all activity. The interesting thing about change is you actually have to know what they were interested in or be able to find out what they used to be interested in. And so you see a young person that used to do some stuff, sometimes you don't get to them until they've already stopped doing everything. And you kind of have to do a history or a retrospective to like find out, what did you used to love to do? What happens when you try and do that? Early morning waking, marked psychomotor agitation, excessive or inappropriate guilt. And then you've got with psychotic features. So again, to step out, and this is from America's Lighthouse. Here's that link. I think that is an excellent resource for schools and for teachers. But similarities between adult and teenage: feeling sad or empty inside, irritability, much more common and pronounced in teens, low self-esteem, feeling guilty, believing that you are worthless, thoughts of death and suicide, trouble thinking clearly, difficulty sleeping. All right, so the differences, again, changes in behaviors. Adults, until it stops them. They're going to kind of keep plowing along. So my wife runs an intensive outpatient program for adults. It is in the evenings, 5:30 to 8:30, because most of the people struggling in her program are still going to school, still working every day. Young people, they actually change their behaviors more. Differences is that there are regularly reasons for depression in adolescents. Teenagers may have stressors in their lives that are more overwhelming because they're not able to handle it either cognitively, like their brain's just not developed enough. They haven't developed the emotional tools to handle certain things. A lot of young people, school academics, so you see a massive amount of young people who did incredibly well through elementary, like people, like they were gifted or they were straight A students, and then it changes when they hit middle school and things are harder, and it's not as easy. They're not getting the A's, and somehow they just think that should have come, and so now they're experiencing pressure to perform, and it starts leading into either anxiety or depression. Bullying happens, way more than any of us want to admit, and it is damaging to young people. And so that's kind of like getting put into a fear state regularly. So one-time events, typically can lead, somebody getting shot next to you can lead to PTSD. But if you're bullying a little bit every single day is a level of trauma that it's hard to understand, but it has a huge impact on how a young person, why does this keep happening to me every day? And their brain picks that up. Peer pressure. I think those are kind of a given, but Carrie just asked if somebody with major depressive disorder has their depression under control with their therapy meds, but they are receiving those interventions for years and still require it. Do they still go on to be diagnosed with persistent depressive disorder? Probably going to be dependent on the doctor and the purpose of if there is a reason. I will say how I was trained and how I think most people think about diagnosis criteria and where you have to put it into people's files or insurance is to go with the least long-term damaging thing. All right. So if a young person has lost a grandmother in the last year and they're depressed, I'm going to go with adjustment disorder over depression disorder, because adjustment, you can get readjusted to your world and you don't have to carry that other label all the time. If their meds are handling it and they're getting those interventions for years, their biology is not working correctly. Maybe that's the best way to say it. And they actually need that added support. I would say if they're going to go on and be diagnosed with persistence, it's because there needs to be some other level of intervention done. So you've been diagnosed with major depression for a long time, and maybe you go in and you're like, all right, I'm going to try TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is I'm actually, when I see somebody that's been in that phase for a couple of years, that's where I'm going to be sending them. They may need to write down persistent depressive disorder to justify, or they would go through that criteria. For the most part, and there has to be a reason for changing the diagnosis. I guess that's the best answer I can give you. But yeah, they probably have the persistent depressive disorder that is managed. Again, parental divorce and life changes have significant impact on teens, so we're looking at differences. A lot of that has to do because a young person, life changes, they don't have any control over. I have a divorce in my background. Did it throw me in depression? Probably for a little while, but I knew I had control over that happened. And it was not an uncertainty. I knew what led to it. I knew what I was capable of after. A young person does not have that level of, even faith in themselves that they can handle what's coming next. So these uncertainty times. And then of course, hormones, it's amazing how many factors you actually need to take into consideration when thinking about a young person. And so I don't go to it quickly, but if I hear of a young person, say, and I have them in my program for 5 weeks, and we have a pretty steady state, and then I have a really different state, okay, and realize their first steady state was depressed and anxious and socially avoidant. But if there's somehow a change, like I'm going to start asking some questions about what's going on in their life. Have they had their period? Should we at least think about looking at is an extreme kind of thing. And so, and that's a super concrete, just the general hormonal changes of puberty can lead to a lot of these indications. So I'm going to open it up for a minute or two of questions on just this material we've covered. Even rereading through it right now, I have a hard time conceptualizing the Matt and the Bree example scenarios, and I see them all the time. That's where my challenge comes with DSM, straight up and down diagnosis, and trying to get there. I can check all those boxes, and I have to get somebody into the program. It is not as helpful to me moving forward. So I'm going to take you through a couple of exercises to prove that this is not going to be that dry and boring the whole time, and then we'll end up taking a break. And then we'll come back and move into some more experiences and some tools that you guys can use for interventions at school. But I do one last chance. Your questions have been good. Are there any other questions on the straight DSM kind of thing? I will answer to the best of my ability. I will also forewarn you that my supervisor, one of my early supervisors, thought it was entertaining to him to have to make me diagnose. That's how strongly I don't like diagnosis and labels. Young people suck up labels, and maybe you've seen that. They start talking about themselves as a depressed or a borderline, and not a good state. So I'm gonna leave it open for questions if anything comes up. Got those in my presentation. We've just gone through that in the packet, anxiety and depression disorders, straight from the DSM-5 TR. So Karen just affirmed she definitely sees them hanging on to labels. Man, it is so challenging. Same here. Teens are very interested in looking up labels and self-diagnosing. Yeah, there's a crowd that goes into the labels that has to do with gender and sexuality, and then another crowd, and there's significant overlap, don't get me wrong, but there's another crowd that goes after the mental health. Like, I want something else to be wrong other than me just being a bad person, which is actually a decent place to start, but boy, they just suck them up, and then they learn more about it, and then they like get deeper into it. It's yes. Teens and their parents determining their mental illnesses per Dr. Google. Yep, Google's got lots of uses. Yeah, parents are doing that too. Doctor shopping. Yeah, Dr. TikTok, that one comes. I've actually heard of kids thinking they got something from TikTok, especially when it comes to really, because you got to mix in all the other and we're going to hit on some of these with the dialectics of adolescence, is the, they're trying to form a sense of identity. All right. And I don't have one. I don't have things that really matter to me. And therefore I want to find something that matters to me. I do think that's a good. Taylor shared doing, true diagnostic criteria, but then they do self-fulfill prophecies. Yes, they fulfill those things. If they believe they have something, yes, depression gets overused quite a bit. Like, it needs to be truly significant. Although I'm going to say some of the tools I'm going to try and give you, I actually believe can be preventative and helpful regardless as to whether they are actually diagnosable. So we're going to kind of move into that phase. The two models, I use two models. One is DBT, which is Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. And dialectics is kind of this really bizarre, fun word in that two things can be true at the very same time. And so an adolescent can, both be super socially engaged at school and isolated at home. Both true. Dialectics also means that typically extremes in either direction are not a good idea, and that we need to find a way to walk a middle path in these areas where we have competing dialectics. So some of the dialectics of adolescence are, well, just to set it up for fun. So I'm getting circumcised tomorrow. My friend told me they had it done when he was a few days old. I asked him, does it hurt? And he said, well, I couldn't walk for about a year. This to me is the epitome of adolescent logic. And that image is just so teen to me. Like today, that girl just smiled at me. I'm walking on air. And then the next day, somebody didn't invite me to something they knew I couldn't go to. And oh my gosh, I cannot handle that. So just to set that up, because I think that those kind of things epitomize the dialectics of adolescence. Some of the things in our program that we think about, and dialectic materials for younger kids. When we're done here, and you have a better grasp, our other model is DNAV. I do have some DNAV material for younger kids that I think is at least as helpful as dialectic material. But that's a great question. And let's just say I have a 4, 2 6s, and an 11, and I am so much more comfortable with my teenagers. So younger children are still like a growth area for me as I live it out every day. So I suspect I'll have more if you talk to me again next year. Teen dialectics that we reflect on in our program a lot because of the damage they do. So teens are very narcissistic. They are thinking about themselves all the time. But if you happen, there's also this intense, and we just talked about the labels and other things, there's this intense passion for whatever tribe they choose to be a part of. And you can really do damage in your relationship with a young person by saying an offhand comment about a tribe you don't even know they belong in, and you will destroy their belief in your ability to be meaningful to them. And so I just think that's a super interesting dialectic, that they're thinking about themselves all the time, and their narcissism includes thinking that, even recognizing that they're thinking about themselves all the time, that other people have to also be thinking about them as much as they do. And it's countered with this passion for a tribe. They are tough on the outside versus fragile on the inside. I will regularly, so I'm doing intakes. I've got one after I finish this up today, and I can have a young person in the room with me and his parents, their parents, share, I struggle with this, I'm down here, it's interfering with my life in these ways, very self-aware, sharing that they agree with all the things that their parents are sharing are troubling in their life. Okay, good. We're all on the same page. You want to work on this. We sign you up. You come to group. Show up for group on Monday. Sit in a circle with a bunch of other teenagers. You go around. So, so-and-so, why are you here? What's going on that you join us? They're like, I have no idea. Everything's fine. My parents are making me do this. There's something about that becoming an independent young person that they need to maintain some kind of tough on the outside. And yet very fragile on the inside. I spend a lot of my energy, both personally and trying to convince parents to act as if your young person is fragile on the inside. Act as if they want to be connected to you, even if they, run and lock themselves in their room. Act as if they want to, that they don't want to feel this pain, even though they're acting like they can handle it. So finding a way to act as if, because you just don't get a massive amount of kudos as you're acting as if they want something. Usually they want to blow that off. Cassandra shared the self-centered drive, so narcissism is typical and developmentally appropriate. Yes. Something we need to be mindful of when treating and interacting with adolescents. We can't take it personally. I very much appreciate that comment. That's why I try to bring it out consciously. They are thinking about themselves a lot. It also gives you some leverage when you can find something in there that, okay, so what are you seeing in yourself is really an open door, because they're thinking about it. And if they feel like you actually want to hear that and you cannot take it personally, it's a really good benefit. Another dialectic that we see regularly is structure control versus relationship. I, for one, don't believe change in a young person, or any of us, quite frankly, come without relationship being involved. And so we think and actively work in the program on attempting to maintain or find relationships. And we actually talk about it as a team, who feels connected to this young person. Because if they feel connected to one of us, the rest of us are allowed to speak, because we have different people in there most days. On the other hand, when relationship takes over and they're like bonding with their peers in group, and they're getting more of their relational needs met that way, then we start like having trouble in group, because they don't want to face their own stuff. They want to be engaged. They're more concerned. And so that's when we have to put more structure and control. In our aspect, we've got 10 young people in a room, and we need all of them to move forward. And so there are times our groups, we try not to do things like seating charts just offhand, but if a group is not manageable and we're not moving the whole group forward, we go to the structure and control. We move a little bit towards that other dialectic, or probably more towards the middle path, not letting relationships take over. And then control versus wonder faith. So this is the young person who is like the uncertainty of the world is causing an eating disorder. So they are trying to control the amount of food that goes into their body, or the amount of food that comes out of their body, or they're controlling excessive exercise, or they're trying to control their feelings by cutting or by numbing through drugs and alcohol. So that's control side versus wonder faith, that they actually believe that the world can be an amazing place, that they have faith in themselves or their family or some other type of faith that just gets them through. And that comes from a lot of the work I'm doing on existentialism and trying to help young people feel like there's a purpose in their life. And I've had a couple of comments, so kids have to save face to protect that sensitivity, or not share too much. Yes, I agree with that. And Rebecca shared, I too do not like labels. I do think that as mental health professionals, we have to lead the way on embracing those diagnoses as part of life, and maybe the reality of our makeup, and not a negative part of our existence. Normalizing mental health as a part of ourselves, and the same as our eye color or body type. I appreciate that. And as we move into the DNAV model, I think you'll hear more of that language, and it's why I personally enjoy using it more and thinking about it and sharing it with young people more than diagnostic labels. Others from DBT, dialectics that are consistently there: emotional vulnerability versus self-invalidation. So can I feel and accept things? And some of these comments have just hit on this. Or are any feelings or validation, am I beating myself up because of these things? active passivity versus apparent competence. So I'm either not going to try or I'm going to act too competent. The sensation of unrelenting crisis. So I am in a crisis every day. Every day is depressed. Every day is anxious or inhibited experiencing. So literally, like, I'm just not going to feel the world around me. Say like the Bree concept, or Matt trying to inhibit his real world experience. Excessive leniency versus authoritarian control. So this is, and kids, I used to have this conversation all the time. Kids recognize that their friends whose parents seem to allow them to do everything also don't appear to love them as much. And they kind of get that connection. And yet those that have authoritarian parents who are just telling them what to do and setting a box around them, they fight against unbelievably. So again, these are dialectics because they are extremes, and we need to find a way to walk the middle path. Normalizing pathological behaviors versus whatever, I can't say that word right now, normative behaviors. And I think that's what we do need to normalize things, but we can't normalize somebody who's had a bad day or seen a sad movie and them saying they're depressed in the diagnostic criteria way of it. Forcing autonomy versus fostering independence. And again, this, somewhat parenting styles, but are we making them be autonomous all the time? Or are we picking up after them and actually making them more and more dependent on us so they don't become independent, autonomous persons? So again, those are just things to think about when you're working with a young person, that these dialectics are true. Completely opposite extremes are true, and yet we have to find a way to walk the middle path. Here I think it even speaks to the normalizing concept. So as far as I'm concerned, DBT's biggest dialectics is the dialectic of acceptance and change. And why it's a dialectic, because if you go in the extreme in either direction, it is very challenging and impactful. So I'm just going to imagine myself, if I could fully accept myself in my happy place, I would be sitting on my couch, eating cereal, watching football. All right. Which I at least sat in a chair last night watching the draft. So it's as close as I could get to football last night. But like, if I just accept that that's all completely okay, like I'm not showing up for work, I'm not being a father, I'm not doing the things that bring vitality or value or enjoyment into my life other than these couple of things. And so that's the extreme on the acceptance side. However, the extreme on the change side is just imagine the kid who goes out there and throws a one-hitter, and walking off, he's happy, he's proud of himself, and the dad's like, if you had just thrown a knuckleball there or a curve, you'd had a no-hitter. Like, even a one-hitter that they won is not good enough, all right? And young people constantly, we're going to go through some experiences here in a little bit, are constantly in that I'm not good enough mode. And that is a sensation of constantly having to change. So this person right here, right now, and present in this moment, I can't handle that. That would be accepting of myself. I've got to be different. I've got to be changing. I've got to be something. And so that's an unhealthy extreme also. I would say the goal in our program is for a young person to come to a self-acceptance of this is who I am. This is who I am today. These are the things that led up to who I am today. And I believe if I do something, take on a skill in our case, practice, try something, I can make tomorrow better. So and then tomorrow I accept myself for who I am and the piece of that I got in place, but I can be better the next day. But I still have self-acceptance of myself in this moment and present here. I consider that one about the biggest DBT dialectic because, quite frankly, it applies to all of us that work with young people. We're at a place that my team gets more successes than failures, but that does not mean we don't get failures, all right? We regularly have we have new batch of young people, and the dynamics completely change on us. And we're like, man, everything I did last week worked awesome. You're doing exactly the same thing and it doesn't. So we have to accept this is this group, and what can we do to make this week, this group of young people more effective or move forward. And so we have to work on the change part. So I just think that's a real important component to that. And then I talk with parents about this. It sits on every level. Parents can either be blaming the whole world around them, because of course it's your guys' fault at schools that their kids are having problems, or that somehow social media is to blame for all of this, or just in general society. Or you've got the other set of parents who are like, well, I see myself in them and I blame myself for how I raised them, and then I got divorced because it was more about me. And so parents really, actually, I work with parents. I'm like, you're here. You have to be okay with who you are, where you're at, what brought you to this point. That does not mean you might actually have to parent this young person that you're struggling with or is struggling in a different way. So again, blending the acceptance and the change, that they can come to a place of acceptance and change. And Cassandra, who I did not pay, using treatment and intervention, acceptance and commitment therapy can extremely useful with this age group, especially with teens learning to manage internal and external judgment. So DNAV, which we are going to, is the adolescent version of acceptance and commitment. The adult program here runs acceptance and commitment, and the adolescent program uses DNAV, which is acceptance and commitment for adolescents. So that's what we're going to give you, because I fully agree with Cassandra that this is what's helpful and what works and is the best tool I have seen for working with young people. All right, I want to check. Sorry, which direction did that go? I want to go back. I want to hit on one more point of DBT, and then we are going to take a break and come back in a little bit. Just I drink a lot of soda in the morning, so I need a break. So we're going to take a little bit of a time. But I would say the next most helpful concept from DBT, and that actually can work with young people at any time very, very quickly, is this concept of that we all have all three of these states of mind: rational, wise, and emotional. And we all have a default, a place that we just lean to when we're struggling or stressed or uncomfortable. All right. So rational mind is, decisions are based on what makes sense. This is going to be kind of thinking about Spock or Data or Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory. Somebody that thinks logically, focuses on the facts, compares current and past experiences, really doesn't have much use when you're moving, or you're more in rational mind, either suppresses or ignores emotions, just doesn't have much use for emotions. All right. And again, we can all have all of these, and none of them are just completely good or bad. Turns out I've learned in the last while that being ADHD, and that was there. I am actually very, very much an emotional mind, but I learned all of these strategies and structures that I did so much in my life that I shifted my default place to rational mind. All right. Really incredibly useful in counseling. It is almost impossible to shock me. And so I can be a non-judgmental stance for a young person telling me stuff. I can work incredibly effectively in crisis situations. I can triage. I can keep people safe. I can suppress my emotions during that time, and have learned how to feel them better. So again, there are real solid positives to rational. On the other hand, because it is my default, when my children stress me or I am at the end of my wits, I just want control. I want this kid in timeout here, this kid in timeout here, this kid over here. I want control of my atmosphere because that is logical and makes sense to me, and I am not overwhelmed with that. All right. Again, those are negative traits that go with rational mind. Opposite of that is those that default to emotional mind. I would say 80% of the young people we see that are struggling with anxiety or depression are emotional minded. The decisions are based on what feels good, thinks and focuses on emotion, very reactive and or defensive, often opposed to rational mind. So it is impossible to for them to hear just calm down when they're an emotional mind and they're angry or upset or what have you. And so this is also what I'm in so much pain because of my emotion. I need to do something to deal with my pain. Coping or unhealthy mechanisms can come out of this, or lashing out. The whole Bree walking into the house, probably emotional mind, and just reactive to mom's attitude and goes off on it. All right. Again, those are some of the negatives of emotional mind, but the positives of emotional mind is, like, without emotional mind, I don't think we get Twitter-pated. I don't think we fall in love with newborn babies. I think the majority of incredible art and creativity in the world and over history is made by people from their trying to express their emotions and their emotional mind. And so all of these three states are reasonable places to be. However, both extremes, just like a dialectic, can get you into trouble. And so in our group, we are regularly striving to have them increase their window of tolerance around having a wise mind, where they can strike a balance between what they're feeling and what they know needs to happen. So honoring both of those things, being mindful, being present in this moment, actually feeling what they're feeling about this moment and still doing what's effective in their life. This could look like with a student, they're overwhelmed by the stack of homework, and it's really driving their default is emotional mind, and they're just like, man, this feels so bad to do this, and I'm beating myself up on it. I'm trying to avoid the feeling of failure, but recognizing I could flunk this class, I might not get into college, I don't have my career. Those are very rational minded decisions. A wise mind decision for that young person might legitimately be, I'm going to pick out one specific assignment. I'm going to work for 15 or 20 minutes on that. And then I'm going to go do something, take a break and do something I enjoy for a little while and try to bring myself back to doing the next paper. All right, so that's that wise mind place. We're trying to increase the window of tolerance of that through a ton of tools that we're working on and that we use. And in our case, we actually have fidget things and hard candies and gums in the room, in the group, to help that young person get there. This has some real easy uses for discussion. Like, think of a time when you were in rational mind. Okay, so what did that feel like? Think of a time you were in emotional mind and what kind of decisions. And if you were in wise mind and recognizing you felt that and you knew you needed to accomplish this, what would a wise mind decision look like? This appears either because we repeat it every single day, or it actually resonates that young people actually, this makes a big difference in their way they're thinking. It also gives you ways to target. All right, if you're in rational mind, or we figure out you're in rational mind, guess what? You actually have to learn how to feel more and understand and be able to describe what your feelings are to even be able to handle wise mind. And if you default to emotional mind, we've actually got to teach you ways to use your rational mind to strengthen it so it is easier to get into a wise mind place. With that, I'm going to give us a 12-minute break, unless there are some immediate questions, because I've got a good batch of can still hear me. So Diana just asked if dialectics is basically a way to approach therapy. So DBT is a very well-known treatment modality standing for Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. It's a third wave behavioral treatment developed by Marsha Linehan. That dialectics are a significant piece to it, in that again, that the extremes, I mean, so if you just think about it as the extremes and finding a way to walk the middle path, whatever you're dealing with, it would make dialectics kind of a way to approach therapy. If any of these extremes are interfering with your life, then we need to find a way to find a way to walk the middle path, because it's not like all extremes interfere with people's lives. I'm watching the draft. Those guys spend more than 3 to 5 hours a day doing exercise and physical workouts to be at that place. And those extremes are appropriate, for there. So you're not going to diagnose it with an eating disorder because of excessive exercise. All right. That has brought us to 10:47. I'm going to keep moving because we're now finally to what I consider the fun stuff. I want to start, I have a communication minor, and they teach you to kind of tell people what you're going to tell them, and then so giving them a framework. So BOLD is a process for making wise mind decisions, and BOLD stands for breathing deeply and slowing down. And so this is kind of like thinking of your breath as a ship's anchor, helps you stay where you want to stay, and slowing you down so that you can respond to the world, not react. And this actually comes from one of the ACT guys, the BOLD concept and everything. So right in line with the acceptance commitment therapy. So once you've breathed deeply and slowed down, it's time to observe those thoughts and feelings. And if you know that you feel like, literally yesterday I had a young person say that their rational mindedness shuts out emotions, and I don't pay attention to things because I am just doing whatever I think should be done. All right. And they were able to recognize, like, I've got to work on actually observing my core thoughts and feelings. So that young person has that to work on. And after that, you need to listen to your values. Like, so what's important to you? What direction do you want to go in? What matters to you in this situation? So yeah, you might be very, very anxious about going in and taking an algebra test, but your values of both doing maybe the best you can and going to college come into play. And so you listen to your values as you decide on actions and do them. And there are tools that fit under each one of those categories. I'm going to give you some of them today, but the process itself, and I'm going to give you a sheet that I hand out to other counselors that I work with, especially ones that are working with young people that have been through our program, to specifically help apply this on a day-to-day basis. And again, part of the kind of meta message. So this is DNAV, which is the adolescent expression of ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. And it stands for, from the bottom up, discoverer, noticer, advisor, and valuer. So DNAV, which, they're attempting to make it memorable kind of thing and apply it to things that are in the world. In my world, it's best thought of as the valuer influencing behavioral regulation. So if you're doing things that matter to you, you tend to be more in control of your behavior and what you're doing. The advisor influences cognitive regulation, learning to unhook from and manage the advisor is trying to stop some of that negative thinking, stopping black and white thinking, or at least recognizing it and using a different skill. If you're struggling with black and white thinking, some of those things. The noticer influences emotion regulation. And so if you can notice how you're feeling, it helps you to unhook from your advisor and take valued action because it's important. It helps you manage those emotions because you can know, well, I feel things stronger than other people, so I shouldn't be angry that other people aren't mad about this, something like that. And then the discoverer influences self-regulation and relationships. So, your discoverer is like, how do I learn new ways to interact with the world? We were born We actually started out as discoverers, where everything was trial and error, and we were okay with it. I've yet to run into a baby who, fell down as they started to learn how to walk and like, all right, not going to do that again. Like I failed once, I'm going to fail forever. But that is not what they do. They get back up. They keep trying until they actually learn. And that's what we're hoping to build in young people with the dialectic, or not with the dialectics, but with the discoverer kind of concept. And I will share, I have shared this now 800 and some odd middle schoolers, and then I just spoke again to 150 eighth graders a couple weeks ago, and this language resonated with all of them. Like at the one school, they said, and I got to talk to every kid, but the counselors at that school said the kids started coming up and using this language. So it's why I want to share it. It applies to acceptance commitment. To kind of put it into perspective, when we think about a person in our program, and trying to help you think about it that way, is if you are moving towards what matters to you by strengthening your valuer, and you can see the valuer at the bottom, you are moving closer and closer to an open, authentic, being able to feel natural in the world kind of person. The challenge becomes is that you have to go through all of these actions that you take to avoid feelings, especially pain, cutting pessimism, changing the subject. You also have all of these masking emotions, so really strong emotions, guilt, shame. We can, pull out some of those from the Matt and Bree stories. And you've got existential questions. What's the point? Why am I bothering? All of those compromise the advisor realm. And you have to get through that advisor realm by either engaging your discoverer, so confronting your defenses, or igniting sparks, which are things that are just you're passionate about, or by strengthening that noticer and being able to label and understand and recognize what you're thinking and feeling and what others are thinking and feeling. So it's not just noticing on the inside, it's noticing on the outside, all of which helps you move towards the things that matter to you. So I want to put it all in context. And again, I think BOLD is the process that helps you do this the best that I've seen. And so that's why it's there. So that's kind of a preface for everything we're going to go through next. If you have a blank sheet of paper in front of you, I'd ask you to pull it out, or a note. You don't even really need a big sheet of paper, just something you can write 4 numbers on. We're going to kind of dig deep into how I see these concepts applying to young people. So if everybody would write down 4 numbers between 1 and 63 on something, or remember them, or I just don't want you to change them after I give you the next prompt. And it's not like it's that big a deal, the numbers, you're just picking the fate of the rest of your life. All right, these 4 numbers. I'm going to assume you guys are all doing that and that you are wonderful learners and students and completely prepared, and I'm going to keep moving. So this is a game of life. I want you to all take your numbers and see what life has handed you. What has fate handed you that you need to now deal with? Anybody want to share? Type it into the thing. I will say 90% of the time I do this with young people and their parents, at least somebody got deported. Okay, great. Wow, somebody picked good numbers. Success, be honest, love others, happiness. 7, 13, graduate high school, go to prison, love others, and big business. So I'm going to go with Kara, might be Kara. Is that a life you want to live? This is what I want you to think of. If you just, whatever fate just handed you, is this a life you want to live? So Rebecca got be honest, hate where you live, and she's honest about it. She's going to learn for the rest of her life and experience beauty. So Rebecca might like that life. Vanessa is be honored, hate your job, become lazy, and be a hermit. I'm going to hope that Vanessa that's not a life she wants to lead. And so I throw this up, and I can make this available if it ever, because it just starts us like, what does fate hand us? You know, it hands us our genetics. Like, I don't know that I would have ever chosen. I like wearing glasses now, but at 4, I sure wouldn't have chosen them because I couldn't see the board. But my genetics handed me that. I grew up on the shorter side of things. Those again, you know. So what's just been handed to you by fate? Parents, where you live, whether your parents actually kept you. Lots of things just get handed to these young people. I'm going to skip that and have the same slides. Now, this time, I want you to pick out 4 that would form a life, because like Jamie just got success, big debts, steal, and seek truth. All right, and half of that sounds good, but who wants to have big debts and have to steal from others while they're seeking truth? Jamie, another Jamie, apparently there's a couple Jamies, got fired. So this time, look at this again and pick, Judy was unemployed, angry, ambition, and they apparently stink. So now, if you wouldn't mind, start picking. Oh, wow. Lots of you did this one. Awesome. So somebody asked if there's a copy. I will make actual slides available to you, like the PowerPoint, but I made it into a PDF, so you all have that. But I can give you, if you can use Google Slides, you can have that. So somebody else. No, Rachel, we wanted 4 things that form a life you want to live. Be honest. I can't actually persist. Lead others. See, that sounds like a good life. Vanessa would like to travel, success, happiness. I'm going to finish Vanessa off here real quick. Oops, I lost it. And 60, love. That sounds awesome. Karen, wisdom, happy old age, love others, change the world. Travel, success, marriage, have fun. All right, love others, happy old age. Yeah. Love when I find activities that people want to do. Why I do this with young people is that the V in DNAV stands for valuer. Finding those things that matter to you, that you are willing to push through struggles for. And really, I mean, I make them do this just like I make you do this, and write down the 4 things that form a life that they would like to lead. All right, and we talk about the goal of the program is to help you move towards those things that matter to you. And so helping them in this list right here, we have just in a very small way helped them clarify some things that matter to them, some values in their life that they could move through. And so that's what the game of life is, and I'm more than willing to share that with you, because it sets up figuring out those things that matter to you. And as you figure them out, you have more be better able to manage your behaviors, so you can successfully regulate emotions. You can move towards long-term goals. You're motivated. Those are when things that matter to you, you are willing to persevere through challenges, all right? If you do not have strong values, and I would also say this becomes close to not having a strong identity, it looks like impulsive behaviors, blurting out, spending money, risky behaviors in all kinds of categories, binging or purging, drug and alcohol use. Again, if nothing matters to you, your body doesn't matter to you, you don't matter to you, and it can lead to aggressive, suicidal, or non-suicidal behaviors, all right, that are not good. So that's the value. We're in the DNAV, and setting that up and just helping them understand some of the things that matter to them, because quite frankly, just showing up for an algebra class may not matter enough. On the other hand, if I really like social interactions and I want to play on the baseball team, guess what? I'm willing to show up for the school thing because I'm told I have to do it to get those other things that I want. So that's the valuer in DNAV. I want to give you a couple of tools here, and I'm going to flip to our packet that I've given you, so you all have this. And so there's the game of life written out. We'll come back to the other one. This is the bold living process just broken down. As you understand more of this, as you get this, this is a sheet I think you can literally just have in your office, and a young person comes, have them walk through this. You might have to teach them some breathe skills if those don't make sense. But if they walk through this and they circle things and they answer questions, just the process of filling it out is a breathing, slowing down, coping skill to get them to respond. And it walks them through why are they doing this, what matters to them, and then to decide on their action. Do they need to talk to you right now? Are they ready to go back to class? Do they need to do another breathe skill? So again, I've tried to put that in a way you could just hand that out. So the valuer, the young person's environment, all of you with Matt and Bree, or a lot of you said they needed to hear validation. They needed to hear good things about themselves. Here is a list of, maybe 5 of my groups and what all the young people say validates them. I believe you. Showing effort that you care, not trying to fix things. Do you want to asking them real questions? And so giving you a list of young people actually like this. I forgot to include, and I can add it in a little bit later, but I've got validation statements. I also have statements that make them feel invalidated. And when I work, and we just did this week with all of our young people and families, is that validation changes. So with my 4-year-old, a tickle fight and a hug, and they feel very validated. My 11-year-old who's reading huge novels and is writing stories on their own, validation means I actually have to listen to them use all these names that don't make any sense to them, and I have to be able to respond, because if I don't, or if I just do the head nod and like, oh yeah, they are feeling invalidated. It's harder as they get older to validate them. But these are the statements that young people have clearly said invalidate them. You're a bad daughter. You need some makeup to cover that up. Go back to jail. Stop making excuses. Hurry up. You're late. And I've taken it off this list because I don't talk to teachers as much, but I have a list from young people and parents on what was invalidating and validating from teachers, which is really a fun list. Another tool is, if you have time or you're seeing a young person in any kind of consistency, is to do a values sorting exercise. So again, this is from ACT, Russ Harris of ACT, and a list of values. If you're in the metro area and you can get a hold of me, you can come get a deck of values cards, but you can also just print this out and say, have a young person put a mark. Does adventure matter little to them right now? Matter some? Matter most? And help them go through just a list of examples. It's not a complete comprehensive set of values, but it's really good for them to think about what things do matter to you, and are the things you're doing in your life move you towards those. So this is a value sorting exercise, and they're broken down into domains of, valued living. So what do you value about living life in general? What do you value, what do you value about relationships that you're in? And that includes being kind of in a relationship with parents, families, friends. Then there's valuing themselves. Does it matter to you, fitness or spirituality? And then VPD, valuing in the presence of difficulty. Are they showing courage? Do they believe in forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness kind of thing? So I'm hoping that's a very practical tool you could just start using, printing out, and using with young people. We make them start with that game of life as values, then they go through the list and circle some on here, and then they actually do the card sorting. And we also send the card sort or a list home like this with families, especially with your older teenagers. They're developing their own values, and they may not be in alignment with the family values. And so getting that to be a conscious discussion is a really useful thing. Like in that would be a useful exercise if you were doing family therapy with, Matt's family or with Bree's family kind of thing. Another tool for the valuer that the young people actually find to be fun is to build their own playlist. So, I grew up with mixtapes, and that turned into creating playlists for myself that motivate me or make me think about something I want to contemplate more. And this is an exercise that we have the young people do. And it's like, all right, pick 4 of those values from each of these domains that matter to you. Find a song that reminds you of that, and be able to state why it reminds you of that. Put that whole list together and actually post it somewhere, Pandora, Spotify, iTunes. And they've literally created a list of songs that reminds them of values that matter to them. So very, very concrete. In my program, I get the opportunity to incentivize so they can get a $10 gift card for this. At the end of the day, they've really thought about their values. They have thought about why, and something that reminds them of that. Whether they listen to it or not, I can't control it, but they've put together an actual playlist of values, things that remind them of things that matter to them. Hoping that all makes sense. And again, you have that actual sheet in your packet. I'm going to scoot back to our presentation. And you've got the list of validation versus invalidation, the value sorting exercise, and the vitality playlist. I kind of showed it on the other one, so sometimes I don't always have that packet accessible, but trying to sort them into those piles, and this is kind of what the cover of the card deck looks like. All right. All of you having a sheet of paper in front of you or just being able to notch on something, I want you to try to, and this is also a mindfulness skill, but I want you to notice your own thoughts. I'm going to set a timer for a minute, and I just want you to notice the thoughts that come up. I promise not to ask anyone to share, but on your mark, I just want you to notice those thoughts. If you can put a check mark that you had one, that you, regardless, notice your thoughts for the next minute. Go. All right, finish up that last thought if you don't mind. Part of the reason I do this exercise here is both to get you to pay attention to that inner voice, that advisor voice, but also to share that there's solid evidence that we can't control the thoughts that pop into our head. And again, when I talked to those 800, I did this exercise with the 800 middle schoolers in a gymnasium. They actually got quiet for a minute, and I did check in with 1 or 2 of them. And one young man stands up, and I'm like, well, what was one of the thoughts you had while we were sitting here in quiet? And they're like, lime. I didn't get to go into it. It was like, man, I really want to, but were they thinking about the color, the flavor, the disease? But apparently in a gymnasium full of their peers, they were thinking about lime. That's the thought that popped up. All right. On the other hand, I did this in group. We still do this in group with young people. I'm pretty sure we give them 2 minutes in group, but a young lady came in the room, and she was very, very depressed. Her normal attitude was very flat, demeanor very flat. She's really struggling with motivation to do anything. She happened to come in the day we did this exercise in a really good mood. So she started it in a good mood. but asking her to write down her thoughts over 2 minutes. Her first 3 thoughts were, I like to go shopping. If I'm shopping, I like the Disney store. And that reminds me of the great family vacation my family took to Disney World. Those were her first 3 thoughts. Her last 3 thoughts were, I don't fit in anywhere. No one loves me. Everyone would be better off if I were dead. So in the span of 2 minutes, and I gave them 2 minutes and not 1, of sitting in quiet, listening to her own thoughts, she went from Disneyland to death. All right. That is what this advisor can do. And advisor is, again, the DNAV term for this inner voice that's connected to our amygdala. And the difference between us, because every single creature has an amygdala, all right? Every living creature has the fight or flight response. The difference is a lion, if if a lion is chasing an antelope, let's just imagine, and they don't catch that one. Well, all right, what do? Well, I'm still hungry, so I'm going after the next antelope, and I'm going to go after an older one because that's the one I can catch, right? On the other hand, we as people, we go try and do something, and we fail. We don't make it happen. We could spend the next 2 days being reminded of that failure, reflecting on that failure. What did we do? Beating ourselves up with that. And that is one of the challenges of the advisor mind. And I would argue that young lady, and we knew it at the time, but that's why we were working with her, her advisor had become so self-abusive that it was just interfering with her life and interfering with every interaction she had. And so the advisor influences cognitive regulation. And so, a young person who has found the ability to unhook from this advisor voice, and they can make constructive, respectful choices. They meet commitments. They fill obligations, even when challenging. They can plan, strategize. So those executive functionings work better when they are able to manage that advisor. On the other hand, unskilled cognitive regulation or not being able to unhook from their advisor looks like, black and white thinking, poor perspective taking, poor conflict resolution, invalidating of themselves or others. They actually can't influence their own behavior, much less other people's behavior. So this is, what the advisor, as a challenge looks like in their head. All right. And again, and this is where I believe ACT, DNAV really plays well with DBT, and that the advisor concept has some really big upsides to it. I personally, there is no amount of learning or work or effort I could put in and create a phone on my own, all right? And yet it exists, which means we can pass on information. We can evolve faster as a race. It promotes fast and efficient functioning. Like, all right, I know where I'm going. I know how this is supposed to work, so I can just go through it. Provides helpful rules, all right? I got to go to the Steelers Chiefs playoff game this year. And when you're in that big crowd sitting in a circle, you can just jump up and yell. That's one of the rules. On the other hand, in group, we're still sitting in a circle. You're not really supposed to jump up and yell. And so that's a helpful rules. And so this is a young person. I got to draw a picture of how they visualized their mind, and they did it in the amount of space or energy of their brain that it took up. So school had this big old hunkin' chunk, which you'd expect. Friends had another one. Family had another one. Work was kind of shoved in the middle there. They thought about third wheeling when hanging out with their couple friends. The future was a massive one that they were thinking about all the time. Movies, books, nostalgia, doodling, and then you got in this far left corner, like repressing emotions or repressed emotions. And then this other little square on the right, I'm thinking about what's going on right now about this much. All right. And this is a kid who needed to do some identity work, but moved forward very nicely in it. And so I think they had learned to unhook from their advisor. You know, and then there were positive advisor things. On the other hand, there's some significant downsides. Can lead to rigid rule following, absorbs others' unhelpful ideas, can become detextualized. All right, so absorbing others' ideas. So I am in pain. Incredibly enough, my best friend is also in pain because that's what we made friendships over. They have found that cutting is helpful, and now I learned that, and I'm going to try it. So can become decontextualized. So I would argue that example of Matt and living in his fantasy world is decontextualized. And then finally, it can distort incoming information. I want to give you a little bit of an example of what that's like. Or first off, an example of a young person who's struggling with their advisor. So different young person describing their own head and what's going on in their own head and their advisor thoughts. And so the majority of them are, you know, bad person, ignorant, dumb, overwhelmed, weird, outcast, fat pig, whore, waste of space, selfish. They won't deny. Then you see the little pink ones that are on there, you know, worth it, you're amazing. Those thoughts are there, but they're at the fringes and they're not anywhere near the same amount. And then it turns into this just darkness that's in their head. And they went so far as to say, you know, and on the outside, I'm going to be telling you I'm fine. And so young people are very, very creative. And so using any, like getting them to give you these, that is just so much information about this young person right there that, you know, get them to draw you something if they're stuck coming to your office and not being able to handle their day-to-day life. Oh, I also have them write letters. I shared some of these with you earlier, but this is a letter that has come up from a young person. Dear advisor, you're never necessarily helpful to me. One moment you're telling me I'm wonderful, and the next you're calling me an ugly and effing worthless and unlovable. You'll tell me that no one wants to be around me, and you make me insecure. I effing hate you. You're ruining my life, making me choose to make decisions and ruin good relationships. Throughout my whole life, you tricked me into thinking I am loved, cared for, and worth being here, just to stab me in the back and tear me down piece by piece. You love to tell me how effing sensitive, dingy, and annoying I am, and how much of a bother I am to anyone and everyone. You need to effing shut the hell up and change your attitude. Be more caring and stop making me feel like a piece of shit. Tell me I'm beautiful and unique and important, smart and kind, without turning around and saying the opposite. Make me feel loved. Couple quick thoughts, because I happen to know who that young person was. They were not cussing like regularly. That is not a part of their day-to-day. Like you would not see that on the outside. They also had two parents that, you know, loved and cared for them and were stressing out. And this is still what was going on in their head when they thought about this advisor voice. So that advisor and that young lady, both that young lady I just read you the story of.
Sorry, could you say that again?
My watch likes to listen and respond also. But that young lady that I shared who went from Disneyland to death, is her advisor had gotten so self-abusing that it became a filter that interfered with how they engaged in life. And so I do this differently when I'm in person with people, but I have I want to show a way of how these filters, and again, we all have filters. This is not, again, it's a dialectic because it's not good, it's not bad. We all see the world, you know, progressive, conservative, bulletproof. These things are all there in all of us. But it becomes a different filter when a teen is struggling with anxiety or just depression, or if they're identifying as gay, lesbian, gender fluid, pansexual, questioning, you know, that's a different filter to see the world through. And at the bottom here, you know, hopefully most of you have heard of Children's Mercy Hospital. It's a major, you know, children's hospital here in the area. in the Kansas City Metro. And I got to talk to their social work staff 4 years ago or so. And at the time, they were doing 1,800 adolescent suicide screenings a year. So that was, 1,800 kids that have been sent to them by somebody at their school or family or something like that. And they would argue that 90 to 95% of those young people, why they were having suicidal ideation, fit into one of these 5 categories. They didn't have meaningful connections in their life. They were struggling with anxiety, depression, or an eating disorder. They had gender questions going on. There was significant family conflict, or they were dealing with kind of purpose life, existential questioning. So what's the point? What's the purpose? Children's Mercy actually, like within months of me having that discussion with them, not that the discussion had anything to do with it, changed their whole hospital policy. So at this point, you don't have to, if you go in as an adolescent to Children's Mercy for an earache, they're going to do a suicide screening on you. That's how pervasive Children's Mercy thinks suicidal ideation is in adolescents. Shout out to Mo. Sorry, I know Mo, so I'm going to say hi since her name just popped up on my screen. And so this is the filter. And if I recognize a young person who is dealing with any one of these issues, if I know they are, that's like a yellow flag to me. I'm concerned. If I find out that they are struggling with 2 or more of this list, I just assume there's some suicidal ideation going on, that there are times that they think to themselves, the world would be better off without me. And as many kids as I've said that to, I've not had any of them argue with me on that one. So I want you to think about what this filter does and causes to happen in a young person's brain. So let's just assume that's your average adolescent, and that, quite frankly, between hormones and everything else and their learning and everything else, that their brain that's a good day, all right? And you put this image up in front of them. For whatever that image means, you've shared something with them, you've told them they're a good person, I don't care, but whatever, there's some kind of interaction in their life, all right? Well, this is the image that they probably see. You can still see that there's a cat in the shadow of a lion there. Even through all of that chaos that's going on in their head, they can still hear that or see that or feel that at that point. All right. Let's then add some of the other things that are parts of their life as they start trying to deal with algebra and math and all the complications of learning in this world, or they're, having to just deal with overwhelming school stuff. All right, well, it's a little harder. I can still piece out through all of that there's a cat, and, a lion. Let's just imagine that advisor has gotten so self-abusive, has just become self-abusive, that it's like a black shadow on their brains. And so in this case, that young person's like, oh, there's a kitty cat. They don't actually recognize that you're suggesting that they could become a lion. So I want you to just think about that. As the young person this advisor gets to be self-abusing, if it is beating up on them, they not only is it hard to see their normal thoughts, it's hard to even process any of the school and the technical just work that they need to do on a day-to-day basis, much less get them passionate about something that matters to them and be able to have the energy and sight to go through that per se. So you can do that in other ways. I use translucent folders and put an image on the screen and have people look through it and tell me what they see, because it really distorts it. If you guys hadn't seen that picture per se, would you know that that's a lion in the background? It's really hard to tell in that image. And so if you take that forward, so what happens when a young person grows up and they start with, or life happens between bullying or divorce or some of those other things, or a traumatic event of some other kind, they end up with, a biological filter predisposed towards some other things. And how does that turn into a socially invalidating or, a created invalidating filter? So they start off with somebody doesn't talk to them or rejects them, becomes discouragement, all right? And this is not, at this level, this is more of a, I believe they are not aware of me. This is getting picked third or fourth instead of first. This is seeing a group of young people playing over there who have no idea that you want to play with them, not inviting you in. This is not bullying. This is not, the school changing and telling Matt and calling him Clorox. But they just, because of their biological filter, they start interpreting rejection from the world. That becomes discouragement, which becomes this, I don't fit in. So they start having words for that thought. That gets repeated by this advisor voice. If I don't fit in, becomes something must be wrong with me, becomes something is wrong with me. Again, repeated over the years by the advisor. I differentiate something must and something is wrong with me, because a young person in the something must be wrong with me phase is still saying, if I got the right Crocs, if I put the right little dinghies in them, then I'd fit in. Or if I can talk mom and dad into letting me go to a different dance team or a different school. Like at that point, there's still this hope that they're going to find a place where they just fit in. All right. But they still think something must be wrong with me. But now that it's been proven at dance and at school and with the clothes they wear, and mainly that not fitting in is in their own head. Like they're not going to fit in anywhere because they've already started this sensation of not fitting in. That's when it becomes something is wrong with me. And they now have a core personality trait. We talked about labeling. They are now labeling themselves with a core negative trait. Something is wrong with me becomes I am a bad person. If I'm a bad person, then I can't be loved, cared for. If I can't be loved, I'm not worthy and I have no value. I may as well end everyone's pain by not being alive. I would say again, I have read that syllogistic logic, not really good logic, but logic, to a lot of young people and not have any of them argue that they could not see their own head moving in that direction. I'm going to open it up for questions in a minute, so if you wanted to type them in. I would argue that with an adolescent, we have to, in my program, this is how we act and how we believe, but I think working with any adolescent in any setting, you actually have to help them cope with the symptoms. So they do have heart palpitations, they do feel anxious walking into the door, they do have a lack of motivation or energy because of their depressions. You actually have to help them deal with those symptoms in the present moment. But that all of us, and especially young people, have to cope with what we think of ourselves. All right. So on a good day, and, I will tell you, these Zoom calls without getting much responsiveness from an actual audience is very challenging to me. I have had a good week and a good night and I'm in a good place with my kids and my wife, and I feel pretty good about speaking words into the ether that I get no response from whatsoever. On other days, and even this week on Wednesday with the family day with people in there, I debriefed with a young counselor that I am onboarding, and I'm like, man, when I'm not in a great place, I just talk too much, and I try and explain, like I have to bring a hammer to get people to understand things. And, and that was what I thought of myself at the time, because my words were, for the most part, exactly the same as I share with every family, and families have found it meaningful, which is why I keep sharing it. So these young people really, they have to cope with those symptoms, and they have to cope with what they think of themselves. So we actively work on both of those, at the same time. With that, I haven't seen any questions. I appreciate Karen sharing that this has been good, and I too miss in-person conferences. I would argue, and I use that, I may throw those images on top of this, but I use, when I do it in person, I I point this example out, that a young person who has built that self-abusing advisor, even though people are trying to pour love and compliments and other things into that young person, they may still only be sensing the hate or the dislike or whatever that happens to be instead of instead of love. And this is a really powerful one, because the different filters, that I use, actually love jumps out at certain people and they're like, oh, I can see love. And then others that only can see the hate pieces of it. So I love it. Maybe I should just flat out ask for some more things and get people to shout out to me while I'm doing this. But I appreciate you guys being here and doing that. I'm going to do one more experience with you all. I got a couple more maybe, but I want you to read the poem that comes up on the next screen to yourself without moving your lips, and see if you can do what the poem asks you to do. I literally have no cues to whether you read it or not, but it seemed like long enough for me to read it. In your own space, I would like you to see if, to at least acknowledge to yourself or raise your hand or whatever, but could you listen to yourself? All right. And so with young people in the room, I'm like, can you listen, and their parents, can you listen to yourself? Great. Can you make this part really loud? Can you scream in your own mind? Yes. All right. Can you make it a whisper? Can you do a tiny whisper? All right. And then, I go ahead and like, who's willing to, use their, offer up their crotchety old man voice. And usually I can get one mom who's really compliant to raise their hand. And sometimes I can get them to do their crotchety old man voice. But interestingly enough, if you can do, if they can do any one of those four things, they can learn to unhook from that advisor voice. All right. And they can shift that advisor voice. And why it's called advisor is it's a piece of advice. It's not one we want to eliminate. You should still not run out in front of a street. When your advisor is saying, don't run out in the street with moving cars, you need to be able to listen to it. But at some point you need to be like, I know my advisor is telling me that I won't be accepted in theater class or doing the play, but it's only a piece of advice, and I am going to live by my values, and what matters to me is making connections and trying something new, and I'm going to go ahead and try out for that play. So you move from the advisor controlling you to unhooking from that advisor voice and listening to your own values, recognizing you're struggling with your thoughts, but then listening to your values and deciding and acting on those values. So that's the advisor. I'm going to watch time and talk a little bit faster, but I think I want to explain how this goes together and bring it all together for you, because this feels like such a better diagnostic framework for me working with a young person, and how I can impact this framework to change their trajectory versus just saying, yes, I know they have depression or anxiety or generalized anxiety, which I need, but is not helpful. All right. So the challenge with anxiety, depression, any kind of struggling is the cycle that it puts you into. All right. So anxiety, the cycle is I avoid scary things, might be feelings, might be actual snakes or bees or whatever. Because I'm avoiding this, it reduces activity. All right. So my 5-6-year-old won't go out on the deck to eat dinner, and we want to eat out on the porch. So it's reduced activity. It can increasingly restrict life, and it undermines confidence. All right. So if for whatever reason you went to do something and you got anxious and you avoided it, well, next time you go to do that same thing, you're just like, why even try? I didn't do it last time. I was unsuccessful. That makes you feel worse about yourself, leads to more anxiety, and keeps this circle going down. I love that they've got the kind of the black dark one in the middle. As we move forward, depression, cycle exists. Depression reduces total activities, loss of things that used to give you pleasure or sense of achievement. So you can imagine a young person who used to go riding on their bike. They like to go bike riding. One Saturday, their friend calls them up and say, hey, let's go for a bike ride. And they're like, no, I'm feeling depressed. I don't have the energy. I'm not motivated. So they don't do something that used to give them fun, actually is a sense of achievement. So actually saying, yes, I'm going to get on my bike. I'm going to go somewhere. I'm going to come back is a sense of achievement. And literally we get natural dopamine shots from setting goals and moving towards them. We don't even have to accomplish them. And the accomplishment is sometimes a downer. It's the moving towards something that gives you that sense of achievement and the dopamine. And as a young person shuts that down, they go seeking that pleasure sensation from drugs or other areas because we need that dopamine hit. But anyway, you can see how that worsens how they feel, leads to more depression, keeps that cycle going. So you put them together, anxiety, depression, unhelpful behaviors, whether that is avoidance or coping through vaping or drugs or risky behavior. Any one of those kind of behaviors can lead to new or worsened problems. They then feel worse about themselves, and this cycle just gets horrendous to when it turns into despair and the self-abusing advisor that I spoke of earlier. And so I want to show you kind of how that goes together. And incredibly enough, the things that get avoided or not done because of depression, or if a young person's struggling, is physical activities, social interactions, scary things from phobias to feelings, responsibilities, parental interactions, interactions with teachers, authority, pain. We all want to avoid physical pain, but we're still willing to lift something heavy. But you want to avoid emotional pain. You want to avoid conflicts, challenges. You start avoiding things that could bring vitality and value. I don't think I did it in here, no, but the sad thing about this list is it is exactly the same list that an adolescent needs to be able to accomplish to become an independent young person. All right, so if they start avoiding things, and this is the stuff we avoid, it makes it very challenging for them to become independent young adults. And it is, there's a little bit of word difference, but if you look at the lists of what they need to accomplish as an adolescent and what they avoid, they are just about exactly the same thing. So how do we know? My biggest challenge when we started this program was, a kid was hurting. You brought them into group. They would acknowledge they were hurting. They would set a goal, and that goal wasn't always and then week 3, and they would actually move towards whatever goal they set. And then about week 3, the parents would be like, man, their anger is just not changing at all. And I'm like, I need a way to get them on the same page. All right. And so defense mechanisms is a really powerful tool to do that with. And I have done I'm starting to lose coherency, falling into my hillbilly language, but giving you this list. And what I do with this list is have the young people go through and check those that they know they've done in their life, circle the ones that they see as causing damage or struggle, adding to the problems in their life. And I have the parents do exactly the same thing. And then we move into, which of these are you willing to confront? It gets the parents on the same page. What's amazing is that more often than not, the young person has checked some defense mechanisms the parents don't even know are going on. And B, it allows them to have a conversation while not being in the heat of the defense mechanism going on. And so I tried to give you that tool. You can have young people just fill that out if you're trying to figure out what are, they're not even understanding why they keep hitting these same problems in their life. I think that's a really good tool for that, and giving you a copy that you can print out and use if you so desire. So that is defense mechanisms, because to think about that young person who just gets angry a lot, you know, when we talk about avoidance feels like I'm not doing something, like that's a kind of a passive thing. What if you're trying to avoid the sense of failure? I don't want to feel like I'm failing. Well, how do I do that? Especially if in second block, I get handed this massive algebra assignment that I didn't understand when the teacher was up there. I got none of the problems done, and now I have this huge assignment, and I've got all day to dwell on it. So I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about this assignment all day. I get home, I'm in a bad mood. All right. I walk in the door in a bad mood, and my mom's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I don't know." I'm just like, I'm grumpy and I don't want to talk to you. Well, wait a second. You still have to go do your chores, right? And they're like, "No, I don't want to do my chores." And it ends up turning into this fight. The young person runs upstairs, slams their door, and is so an emotional mind that they're not even remembering they have an algebra assignment, and there is no way they can get calmed down enough to do that assignment. And the parent is literally like, "Who was that child?" And I don't want to deal with them tonight. And they don't even know there's an algebra assignment due. That young person has very actively and very conflictually avoided the sensation of failure. Not in a way that's productive, but they have avoided the sense of failure. That is why we bring up defense mechanisms as a way of getting underneath that surface, getting underneath that I have to be tough all the time. And we bring them back to what defense mechanism are you trying to confront? How are you using this skill to confront that defense mechanism? Which brings us back to our growth triangle, and just to where I put that in perspective. Those defense mechanisms are a great big portion of that advisor realm. All right, so I want you to see where that is. And, I don't just talk about this model or talk about these random pieces. It adds together as if they can find ways to try new behaviors instead of these defense mechanisms, or if they find something that matters to them enough, they ignite a spark that's willing and helping them push through those defense mechanisms. So, and then the other side of that is the noticer and getting through those emotions, and this is the N in DNAV. And if you're not skilled at emotion regulation, you're going to vulnerability. You're feeling everything. You're reacting to everything. Quite frankly, lability. You're just kind of flat. Anger outbursts, depression, anger, shame. This is when you're unskilled at emotion regulation. So you can't control that emotions. You can't manage it. Leads to problems. So strengthening the noticer makes you more skilled in emotion regulation. So aware of and being able to handle both positive and negative. Young people will tell you that they can't handle, they don't even recognize some of those positive experiences in their life. They learn how to express them. So working on the noticer influences their ability to recognize emotions. The goal of the noticer is to create a space, all right, between feelings and thoughts and outward behavior. So in our terminology, we say, instead of reacting, how can you respond? So you're not having to react to that, advisor thought or negative emotion. You can respond with your values. Some of the questions that you can use: what signals are you getting now in your body? Are they linked to feelings? What's going on around you? Were people talking about you and that's what led to this? What are you doing? What thoughts are showing up? So there's some questions you can, ask to be checking. And, if the answers are, I don't know, or it's always the same, anger, they might not have a strong noticer. They might not even be able to label and recognize those things. I have no idea what happened at the beginning of that. But the noticer, and that is supposed to, it's supposed to say, the noticing of emotion, or it's emotional reasoning. All right. And again, this is not something we actually teach children, but why do we start avoiding emotions? Well, we have words and we have logic, and when we don't mix those together well, and I think there's very few of us that are going to say that adolescents are the most logical creatures, much less anyone younger than them. All right. A. These are inferences. Emotions as causes, reasonings can lead to long string of inferences. So emotions as causes. I hit because I was angry. And why wouldn't you think that? My kid hit something. I'm like, why were you hitting that? Well, I was angry. All right. Well, if I'm not angry because I got in trouble for being angry, I won't hit. That is fairly decent logic. If I'm not angry, I won't hit. If I can stop myself from feeling angry, I won't hit. Anger is bad because it makes me do bad things. If I feel anger, I have a problem. There is something wrong with me. So at that point, they have, like, I may as well turn off this whole emotion category so that I don't do bad things. Well, incredibly enough, you can't just turn off anger. You turn off anger, you end up turning down all the things that bring you pleasure also, because you're shutting down your emotional systems. And rarely do we hear the message, and I'm actively practicing this with my young children. It is okay to feel angry and to feel like somebody did you wrong. It is not okay to hit or threaten or actions based on that. So trying to separate the actions from the emotions. I have no idea why it's on two slides right next to each other, but this one's easier to read. I think I have just enough time to walk you through an experiment that you can do. If you are so inclined to do things experientially, I would love it if you would take your hands and start with them just like this, but I'm going to show you how I do this with young people in the room. All right, so it's an experience. I say everybody's got a balloon. See if I can keep the balloon in sight. And I'm going to read you a list of phrases. If any of these have been true for you or they're true all the time, I want you to blow some air into it. I frequently pretend like everything is okay when it's not. I ignore my emotions. I smile even when I am sad, hurt, anxious, or angry. People are surprised when they find out I'm depressed or anxious. I focus on other people's problems and ignore my own. I'm literally paid to focus on other people's problems. I feel emotionally numb a lot. I will hold in my emotions until they are too big to ignore. People will tell me that I am emotionally distant. That whole list is the stuffing side of this dialectic, all right? Stuffing on that side of this dialectic. The other list, sticking. I often replay a crisis or difficult event over and over in my head. I focus on my difficult emotions. I beat myself up a lot for things that are in the past. Most of the time, I don't let myself see the positives. People tell me I don't get over things easily. People tell me I make a bigger deal than I should out of things. It is hard for me to let go of my difficult emotions. So that list is those young people or us that are sticking. So if you've been doing that with your hands, maybe they're this far, maybe you're really healthy people and they're close. But at this point with young people, I'm like, it's hard for me to let go of difficult emotions. So on 3, I want you to let go of your difficult emotions. 1, 2, 3. Guarantee you, and in a group especially, somebody's going to get hit by somebody else's balloon. All right? We get to clearly make the example, and they will talk the whole time because some of them are blowing on every one, that the balloon's going to explode. And right there, you get the example. If you are stuffing your feelings down, if you are sticking with negative emotions all the time, you are going to end up lashing out at other people. And it is going to land on other people in incorrect ways. We do the same exercise, and this one's really easy to do with your hand, is just let a little out with each of the items from this list. And you guys have this list in your packet. I don't think I'm doing anything that I don't just try to give you access to. But feel your feelings. I notice my enjoyable and difficult feelings when they are happening. I let my feelings come and go. I notice both the positives and the negatives. I'm usually able to tell people how I'm feeling. I am comfortable with my emotions. The people close to me usually know how I'm feeling. When I have a difficult emotion, I can feel it without holding on to it. And again, the goal here is to let a little bit out with every feeling, every sensation. Practice this, all right? If somebody's been bullying and they stuffed for years and years, literally they've now got this despair pit. They both have to learn how to express their emotions in small doses as they're actually feeling things. They also have to figure out how to tap into that deep-seated pain. This is Matt and Bree again, that they are feeling inside, and figure out how to let that out in small doses, because when it's let out in huge doses, the most prominent example I have of that is a young person who literally cried for like the whole day until she went to sleep. Like we finally got them to recognize they had feelings and emotions, and it just overwhelmed them for days. And we had to step back and like, how do you manage this? How do you let it out a little bit at the time? So that is the balloon demonstration for the noticer and the dialectic around, so feel your feelings is a DBT skill, and the dialectic is, are you a stuffer or are you a sticker? And the goal is to feel your feelings. And the balloon example is very powerful with young people. I have given you a tool in your case, and I'm watching the time and need to be told if I need to stop hardcore at noon or not. But this exercise is a way to help young people connect that their feelings are actually connected to need, that we all have needs. And when they're not getting met, it can lead to depressive feelings, anxious feelings. I need to be understood, the need to feel welcome, the need to feel important, the need to feel comfort, the need to feel to celebrate, the need to have purpose. So we all have these needs, and recognizing how to get these needs met in healthy ways. And so we've given you an experience to walk through. I think I'm going to flip over to the other screen and just show you how it looks like on paper. I am recording this. Somebody just asked if it's available for somebody else. I am recording it, the slides, the PowerPoints. Obviously, I'm giving you links that are open to everyone. You can share that. And so I even have that goal. Defense mechanisms, we ask young people to write down their defense mechanisms and how to confront it. So you've got that exercise. And then can they later on, if they're going through the group or you're talking about some skills, are there things that they could do specifically that you've talked about? I believe in strengths, so I've given you a strengths sheet. Here's the feel your feelings sheet. So this is the observe skill. So we're in the bold language, the observe skill of noticing, working on your noticer. We all have these needs, and you can put that together by, at some point, I have had my need to be understood met. Where did that happen? And have them create a list of places that happened. When has that not happened? Create a list. Why do you create these lists? Well, I want more of ways that I want to put myself in places where this need has been met more. And I want to maybe try to eliminate some of those areas where this need has not been met. My daughter, just to give you an example, she didn't think about it quite this way, but we enrolled her in 2 art classes at the same time, one at one studio and one at another studio. She will tell you that she loves drawing. She has learned from both of them, but the emotional needs that are getting met at one are so much more that's the one she's going to choose to go back to. So that's what this exercise is for. The second part of it is to then connect those needs to actual names of sensations. And a little shout out to Mo, who that shared with this. I gave this tool a while back in a little bit different format to him, and said that a lot of young people, this recognition that emotions are attached to needs is huge. They don't get this. They haven't been taught that. And so I'm just told we are getting done at noon to jump on a board meeting. So I'm watching the time very carefully. But you have this tool, and a way to use this tool to get there is to say, and it doesn't matter what age you are, you can think of 10 experiences or events and this could be a book series that you chose to read or getting moved or a divorce, but 10 experiences. And then go back. What need was met or not met? What emotion was triggered? What are other ways of getting that need met? And so you can walk them through that process of getting those needs met. All right, so that's a really specific tool around the noticer. The discoverer is really trying to find new ways to add things into their life. It really involves relationships and self-regulation. And so can you actually, as you learn how to learn from trial and error, you learn from interacting with other people. And so that's why it's a trial and error. If what I learned from that person is that I don't think I'm not good, or they've called me a name or something, I don't want to interact with that person anymore. We'll send out the slide. This is a really good video. I think he describes what the discoverer concept means in real life better than anyone. But he says the way we can control being, and again, that early dialectic of control versus actually experiencing the world, make it less terrifying. You can do nothing, create the bare minimum, be bland, look just like everyone else. And you guys have seen teens that do this. Create things you don't care about, sarcasm, that kind of stuff. Never share. Create things for everyone is the way he says. I would also say that young people can create chaos. Self-harm, eating disorders is going to create chaos at school and at home. You can stop creating, and that would look like suicide. That strengths things is used to get a young person to check mark the strengths, circle the top 5s. I really believe it's easier to lean into your strengths than it is to just try to stop doing bad traits. The discoverer, really simple, is try it, track it, build it, and finish with the circle. This would be using DNAV in a very concrete form, and I'm down to like 2 minutes, so I'm just, you guys get a copy of this on the slides. But what are their values? What are they not good at? Low body awareness, no evidence that they test. So this one's on Matt. Relies on past learning, especially exposure to his father's rules and criticisms. This is Bree. People should be in a certain way. She has clearly a passion for art. She wants independence. She's afraid of her feelings. She's messed and maladaptive sensation seeking. And then brings it back to bold and the sheet that I shared in there early with you, that I think if a young person can build this process of slowing themselves down, observing their thoughts and feelings, listening to their values, and then deciding on actions, they will move forward much more progressively. We accept young people all the time. If you've got some that would fit into our category in these areas, and that's all I got.